She changed her name after believing a dying bird's soul had entered her body. She breastfed her baby live on national television, without warning, without apology. She fell in love with a man 21 years younger, and for over a decade, the media couldn't stop obsessing over her face, her choices, and her silence. But through it all, Barbara Hershey didn't break. She didn't launch public rebuttals. She didn't go on talk shows to explain herself. She didn't even try to prove the critics wrong. She just kept doing the one thing they never expected her to do: act. And not just act, but transform. Over 5 decades, Barbara Hershey would disappear into some of the most complex, emotionally charged, and controversial characters ever brought to the screen. From the haunting horror of The Entity, to the sensual defiance of Mary Magdalene in The Last Temptation of Christ, to the quiet maternal ache in Black Swan, she delivered performances that were raw, layered, and impossible to forget. Yet somehow, through all of it, she was never fully embraced by Hollywood's inner circle. She wasn't flashy, she didn't chase red carpets, she aged without apology, and she dared to live on her own terms. That refusal to conform cost her more than once. Roles lost, reputations questioned, a career nearly erased. But it also gave her something most actors never reach: truth. Barbara Hershey is not just an actress. She's a survivor of a system that never knew what to make of her. And if you've ever felt judged for being different, ever felt invisible for speaking the truth, or ever loved someone the world said you shouldn't, her story is yours too. But before the name changes, before the breastfeeding scandal, before the protest-filled premieres, there was a little girl in a quiet house, learning how to feel without ever being allowed to show it. Barbara Hershey was born on February 5th, 1948, in Los Angeles, California, just a few miles from the glittering studios of Hollywood. But while the city was home to dreams, premieres, and red carpets, the Hershey household was the complete opposite: quiet, strict, and emotionally locked down. Her father, Arnold Nathan Hershey, was a second-generation American Jew with roots in Hungary and Russia. Her mother, Melrose Moore, came from a conservative Southern background, raised in the heartland of Arkansas. Together, they created a home that was structured, modest, and emotionally repressed. Barbara was the youngest of 3 children, and from the outside, everything probably looked normal. But inside the walls of that home, there was an unspoken rule. Emotions were not welcome. Sadness, frustration, fear, they were seen not as natural, but as weaknesses. You weren't allowed to complain, Hershey would say decades later. You weren't allowed to say anything negative. What happened instead was silence. Long, cold, suffocating silence. In that silence, Barbara began to fracture. But instead of breaking, she created. Alone in the backyard, away from the unspoken rules of the house, she began to invent characters: witches, rebels, orphans, figures who felt everything she wasn't allowed to. This wasn't just playtime, it was emotional survival. And that backyard became her first stage. There were no audiences, no applause, just a little girl pouring her unspoken feelings into imaginary roles. Each one was a tiny rebellion, a secret performance no one ever saw. And it wasn't about fame, it wasn't even about dreams, it was about needing a place to exist. By the time Barbara reached high school, that secret performance instinct was impossible to suppress. She enrolled at Hollywood High School, ironically located in the heart of the very industry she would one day challenge. Known for its performing arts program, the school gave her access to drama classes and stage productions. But even then, she was painfully introverted. She could barely raise her voice in a classroom. She rarely made eye contact until she stepped onto the stage. There, something shifted. In costume, under lights, playing someone else. She wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't that she was confident, it was that she was allowed to be real for the first time. No rules, no silence, no expectations to smile and pretend. This wasn't a girl chasing attention, this was a girl chasing air. But Hollywood doesn't just watch you act. It watches your name, your face, your background. And just as Barbara Hershey was discovering her voice, Hollywood decided her name wasn't good enough, and what they asked her to change would be the first cut in a long line of sacrifices. Barbara Hershey was starting to get noticed. She had the instincts of a natural performer, the kind of presence that didn't need training or technique, just silence to break through. But in the 1960s, Hollywood was still deeply uncomfortable with certain kinds of identities. And Barbara's name, it was a problem. Hershey, they said, was too ethnic, too Jewish, too complicated. An agent pulled her aside and said bluntly, "You'll never get cast with a name like that." The message was clear. If you want a career, change who you are. So at barely 18 years old, she was forced to choose between her identity and her future. And like so many artists before her, she surrendered a piece of herself to survive. She dropped Hershey and became Barbara Hershey. But she hated it. She thought it sounded sweet, soft, like a chocolate bar. And that wasn't her. She wasn't sweet, she wasn't soft. She was layered, haunted, angry at the world for making her hide pieces of herself just to be seen. But she smiled through it. She accepted it because she wanted to work. And in Hollywood, Working meant vanishing parts of yourself on command. This wouldn't be the last time she'd give something up for a role, but it was the first crack in a long line of fractures between Barbara Hershey the actress and Barbara Hershey the human being. Still, even with a name she didn't love, Barbara Hershey wasn't chasing stardom. She never had been. Acting wasn't her fantasy. It was her release. A way to step into pain instead of run from it. And that emotional honesty would soon be discovered by someone who knew exactly what it looked like. Sally Field. Barbara Hershey was still a painfully shy teenager when she met Sally Field at Hollywood High School. Field, already full of energy and charisma, saw something in Barbara that no one else had. Depth. And more than that, talent. It was Sally Field who introduced Barbara to a casting agent. An audition was being held for a new television series, Gidget. Field was the star, and Barbara was just the quiet girl in the back of the classroom. She didn't think she belonged, but she went anyway. And at that audition, something happened. Barbara sat in silence until she was asked to perform. Then, like a switch flipping, the quiet disappeared. She stepped into the scene, and the room went still. The casting agent, who'd been ready to dismiss her, was left stunned. She didn't perform like a beginner. She performed like someone who had been holding her breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. That first audition didn't land her the role, but it opened the door. Within a year, she was booking jobs. Her first role came at just 17. And by the time the 1960s ended, Barbara Hershey had built a reputation as a young actress unafraid to take risks. She took on roles that other actresses wouldn't touch. Gritty, complex, often dark. In With Six You Get, Egg Roll, The Monroes, and especially The Baby Maker, a controversial film about surrogacy. She showed early on that she wasn't here to play it safe. She wasn't interested in being pretty and forgettable. She wanted roles that meant something, roles that made people uncomfortable. But the role that would define the first act of her career, and nearly end it, came in 1969. It was a film called Last Summer, a coming-of-age story wrapped in emotional cruelty and psychological tension. In one scene, Barbara was asked to release an injured seagull as a symbol of rebirth. But after days of filming, something went wrong. The bird, weakened and confused, fell from her hands and died, right there in front of the camera. No one knew what to say. The moment was tragic, quiet, surreal, but for Barbara, it was spiritual. "I felt its soul enter me," she said later. "I knew I couldn't keep going as I was." No one told her to do it. No one asked her. But Barbara Hershey did something no actress had done before. She changed her name to Barbara Seagull. And with that one decision, she went from rising star to Hollywood pariah. Hollywood didn't know what to do with Barbara Seagull. When Barbara Hershey changed her name following the death of a bird on set, the industry didn't respond with understanding. It responded with laughter. Studio executives rolled their eyes. Casting agents whispered about that weird girl who thinks she's a bird. Newspapers openly mocked her. Producers started backing away. To the world, it looked like a breakdown. To Barbara, it was something else entirely. "I believed in that moment," she later said. "It wasn't superstition. It was emotion. It was grief. It was art." But emotion and grief don't sell tickets. And in an industry obsessed with marketability, the name Seagull became poison. Roles dried up. Phone calls stopped. And the girl who had just started climbing Hollywood's ladder suddenly found herself shut out of the building entirely. From 1970 to 1974, Barbara Hershey, now Seagull, was virtually invisible. She took roles in small, independent films. She worked with new directors. She took anything that allowed her to keep acting. One of those films was Boxcar Bertha, an early project by an unknown director named Martin Scorsese. That film introduced her to David Carradine, an actor as wild and unfiltered as she was. They fell in love, had a son, lived like outlaws. But artistic credibility couldn't protect her from economic reality. She was broke, disrespected, uninsurable. Her agent couldn't get her in the room, let alone land her a role. And all because she dared to live emotionally in a place where emotions were supposed to be scripted. "I believed in the meaning of that name," she admitted years later. "But eventually, I couldn't afford to believe anymore." So, after nearly 5 years of exile, she made the hardest decision of her life. She let the bird go. She dropped Seagull, reclaimed Hershey, and walked back into the system that had ridiculed her. Not with a grand comeback, not with an apology, but with a quiet kind of defiance. A decision to survive on her own terms, even if it meant giving up a piece of herself. And Hollywood, ever forgetful, welcomed her back, slowly, cautiously. But this time, Barbara Hershey wasn't looking to fit in. She was looking to make something real. Barbara Hershey's re-entry into Hollywood wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. The roles that followed weren't blockbuster leads or glamorous red carpet moments. They were quiet, strange, and powerful, just like her. In 1984, she appeared in The Natural, playing Harriet Bird, a mysterious woman whose quiet smile masks something darker. Her screen time was brief, but unforgettable. One glance, one action, and the entire film changed direction. Audiences left theaters asking, "Who was that woman?" Then came Our Tin Men in 1987, a film about pride, masculinity, and deception. Hershey played Nora, a woman caught between two salesmen battling their egos. But what she brought to the screen wasn't typical romantic drama. She brought silence, stillness, emotional weight. She didn't dominate the screen, she haunted it. These performances weren't about reclaiming fame. They were about proving she never lost her gift. And Hollywood noticed. In 1986, Woody Allen cast her in Hannah and Her Sisters, giving her the role of Lee, a woman tangled in an affair, suspended between desire and self-doubt. The character was quiet, cerebral, emotionally elusive. It was a role that required an actress who didn't need to speak to be understood. And Woody Allen said he cast her after only 3 days. There was something in her eyes, he said, something unspoken. This was Hershey's true comeback. A decade after nearly being erased, she was now working with the most respected filmmakers in the world. And with every new role, she wasn't just proving herself. She was redefining what a woman in Hollywood could look like. Quiet, mature, complex, unapologetically layered. But while most actresses spent their careers chasing the perfect role, Barbara Hershey was about to do something no one expected. She was about to create it herself. And the role she brought to life would shake the world. Barbara Hershey didn't just act. She hunted for roles that spoke to something buried, something unresolved. And in the mid-1980s, she found a story that wouldn't let her go. It was a novel, The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis, a controversial reimagining of Jesus' life, not just as a divine figure, but as a man torn between human longing and spiritual destiny. And tucked inside that story was a character most filmmakers treated like a side note, Mary Magdalene. For centuries, Magdalene had been reduced to 2 dimensions, either a saintly witness or a sinful outcast. She was never given a voice, never shown to be anything more than a narrative accessory to the men around her. But Barbara saw something else. She saw a woman in pain, a woman who had been discarded by society, a woman trying to love, to be forgiven, to be seen. She brought the novel to Martin Scorsese, the very director she'd worked with during her Seagull years. At the time, the idea of filming it was almost impossible. Studios were terrified. Religious groups were already protesting. But Barbara held on. For years, the project stalled, funding collapsed, studios backed out. Scorsese was blacklisted, but she stayed with it, quietly, insistently, until the film was finally greenlit. And when it came time to cast Mary Magdalene, there was never any doubt. Barbara didn't just play Magdalene, she became her. She studied scripture, built psychological backstories, asked how a woman shamed by the world could still love someone who might abandon her for heaven. What does faith look like when you've been exiled from it? When the film was released in 1988, all hell broke loose. The Last Temptation of Christ was banned in Greece, Turkey, Chile, Singapore. In the US, theaters received bomb threats. Religious groups called it blasphemy. Protesters lined up with signs accusing Scorsese and his cast of heresy. But amid the chaos, one thing stood above the noise: Barbara Hershey's performance. Her Magdalene wasn't a symbol. She was a person. She ached, she longed, she forgave. Critics said she gave the film its heart, its only warmth. Where the rest of the film was philosophical, she was emotional. Where it was intellectual, she was real. And when asked later how she approached the role, she didn't mention religion or redemption. She just said, "I knew Magdalene. I was her, judged, misunderstood, still loving." 1 year before she played Mary Magdalene, Barbara Hershey took on a role so raw, so violent, and so ahead of its time, it nearly derailed her comeback before it even began. It was 1982. The film was The Entity. The premise: a single mother in Los Angeles is repeatedly assaulted by an invisible force. It sounds like horror. It was marketed as horror, but it wasn't about ghosts or thrills. It was about something real, something brutal, something no one in Hollywood wanted to talk about: sexual violence. Barbara Hershey played Carla Moran, a woman who is beaten, raped, humiliated, and worst of all, not believed. There is no villain to see, no monster to fight. The enemy is unseen, like trauma, like disbelief, like the judgment that surrounds every woman who dares to say, "This happened to me." From the first scene, the film refused to look away. Hershey's performance was harrowing. No stylized fear, no cathartic revenge arc, just pain, isolation, exhaustion. A woman trying to prove to doctors, to her children, to herself, that she wasn't crazy, that what happened was real. One scene in particular drew outrage. Carla is assaulted in her sleep and experiences an involuntary orgasm. Feminist groups called it exploitation. Religious groups said it was depraved. The press labeled it pornographic. But Barbara didn't flinch. "I didn't make a horror movie," she said later. "I made a film about what it's like to be violated and not believed. That's the most terrifying thing." And history would prove her right. Decades later, as the Me Too movement exploded, critics and scholars returned to The Entity, What once seemed sensationalist now felt prophetic. Carla Moran wasn't a victim in a ghost story. She was a metaphor for every woman silenced by disbelief. Every survivor told they were imagining it. Barbara Hershey didn't defend the film back then. She didn't argue with reviewers. She just let it exist. And in doing so, she created a performance so unsettling, so human. It still shakes audiences today. The Entity wasn't just a movie. It was a warning, a mirror. And Barbara, once again, had the courage to hold it up, even when no one wanted to look. Barbara Hershey and David Carradine were never meant to be Hollywood's golden couple. They were its wild card. Rebellious, artistic, and defiantly unconventional, they lived like a pair of outlaws in love. They had a son, named him Free, and posed nude for a Playboy in a photo shoot that blurred the line between film and real life. But behind the passion were fractures. Carradine struggled with substance abuse, was arrested for theft, and caught cheating with another actress. Barbara stayed silent, but inside, she was unraveling. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1973, the couple appeared on The Dick Cavett Show. During the taping, their infant son began crying backstage. Cavett joked, "Would you like to nurse the baby?" expecting a laugh. Barbara didn't laugh. She stood up, walked off stage, returned holding her son, and began nursing him, live on national television. The audience froze. The camera cut to commercial. When they returned, Cavett asked in disbelief, "Did you just breastfeed on air?" Calmly, she said, "I did." And that was it. The media exploded. She was called unstable, inappropriate, unprofessional. No one cared that she had turned away from the camera, or that she was comforting her child. To the public, she wasn't a mother or an actress anymore. She was a scandal. Her career chilled almost overnight. In 1975, she quietly ended her relationship with Carradine. No press release, no interviews, just quiet heartbreak and a return to survival mode. But Barbara Hershey didn't vanish. She waited, worked, chose her roles carefully, and then, in 1987, she came back swinging. That year, she starred in Shy People, playing a hardened woman living in the Louisiana bayou, fierce, isolated, unforgettable. The performance earned her Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival. Most actors never win Cannes. Barbara won it again the very next year. In A World Apart, she portrayed a white journalist opposing apartheid in South Africa, torn between truth and safety, activism and motherhood. It was haunting, bold, devastating. 2 years, 2 Cannes wins. It was no longer possible to dismiss her. The actress once ridiculed for naming herself after a bird was now being hailed as one of the most emotionally daring performers in the world. She didn't come back with a PR campaign. She didn't cry for sympathy. She just acted and forced the world to watch. Barbara Hershey never played the game. She never softened herself to be liked. She never faked normalcy to get a role. And for decades, Hollywood didn't know how to handle that. But she was too quiet, too intense, too willing to disappear into roles others were afraid to touch. She played women the world wanted to forget. Victims, outcasts, rebels, saints who weren't quite saints. And she played them not with loud monologues or grandstanding, but with silences, with stares that said more than scripts ever could. She was judged for loving freely, mocked for aging naturally, criticized for being too much and not enough all at once. And through it all, she kept acting. From The Entity to The Last Temptation of Christ, Black Swan to The Manor, she became the kind of actress who didn't need the spotlight to be unforgettable. Barbara Hershey never asked to be a legend. But that's exactly what she became. Because in an industry obsessed with surface, she chose soul. And in a world that wanted her quiet, she spoke through art and was heard.